Imagine standing before a giant so vast and fearsome that no one dares to meet him in battle. Your whole nation trembles in silence, paralyzed by dread. Would you have the courage to face such a daunting foe? Could your faith in God be strong enough to carry you through the impossible? In the humble town of Bethlehem, there lived a young shepherd boy named David. David was no warrior, but he was a man of deep faith and courage far beyond his years. His days were spent tending to his father's sheep, protecting them from wild animals, and learning to rely on God's strength. Though small in stature and inexperienced in battle, David's heart was brave, and his trust in God unwavering. At that time, the armies of Israel faced a terrifying enemy, the Philistines. They had camped on one side of a valley, while the Israelites assembled on the other. Between them stood a giant named Goliath, a warrior over 9 feet tall, clad in heavy armor and wielding colossal weapons. Every day, Goliath stepped forward and challenged the Israelites to send out a champion to fight him in single combat. His booming voice echoed across the valley, mocking and taunting the Israelite army, striking fear into their hearts. For 40 days, Goliath's challenge went unanswered. The soldiers of Israel cowered, unwilling to risk their lives against such a formidable adversary. They whispered among themselves, their courage waning, convinced that no one could defeat this giant. The entire army was gripped by hopelessness, frozen in fear. One day, David arrived at the battlefield, not as a soldier, but to bring food to his brothers who were serving in Saul's army. As he approached, he heard Goliath's mocking voice echoing across the valley. Shocked and appalled that no one dared to stand against the giant, David's heart burned with a mixture of outrage and determination. How could this Philistine defy the armies of the living God and go unchallenged? David stepped forward and volunteered to fight Goliath himself. His brothers were astonished, and the soldiers doubted his ability. But David's faith was resolute. He told them that God, who had protected him from lions and bears while tending sheep, would surely deliver him from this giant as well. David's confidence was not in his own strength or skill, but in the power of God. King Saul heard of David's boldness and summoned him. At first, Saul hesitated. David was only a boy, inexperienced in warfare. He offered David his own armor, hoping it would protect him in battle. But the armor was heavy and unfamiliar, and David declined, choosing instead to face Goliath with the weapons he knew best, his sling and 5 smooth stones he picked from a nearby stream. Armed with nothing but his sling, stones, and unshakable faith, David approached the giant. Goliath saw the young boy and laughed in scorn, mocking him for coming to fight with sticks and stones instead of swords and spears. The giant cursed David, confident that victory was assured. But David was undeterred. He spoke boldly, declaring that he was coming in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel whom Goliath had defied. David proclaimed that God would deliver the giant into his hands, and that all who witnessed the battle would know that the Lord saves not by sword or spear, but by his mighty power. With a swift motion, David reached into his pouch, took a smooth stone, and placed it in his sling. He swung it around, then released the stone with precision aimed at Goliath's forehead. The stone struck true, sinking deep and causing the giant to stagger and fall face down to the ground. Without hesitation, David ran to Goliath, took the giant's own sword from its sheath, and used it to kill him. The mighty Goliath was defeated by the hand of a shepherd boy who trusted in God's strength rather than his own. The Philistine army, seeing their champion fallen, fled in terror. The Israelites, once paralyzed by fear, were now filled with renewed courage and joy. David's faith and bravery had inspired the nation, proving that even the smallest and most unlikely among them could triumph through trust in God. This moment marked the turning point for Israel. Where fear had reigned, hope now blossomed. David's victory was not just a physical battle won, but a testament that with God, no giant is too great to overcome. After the giant Goliath fell, the battlefield was filled with a new kind of energy. The Philistine army fled in panic, their confidence shattered. The Israelites, who had been paralyzed by fear for so long, now erupted in cheers and song. David's victory was more than a battle won. It was a miracle that showed the power of faith in God. David lifted his voice in praise, thanking God for delivering him from the hands of the giant and his enemies. He knew that it was not by his own strength or skill that he had triumphed, but by the power of the Lord Almighty who fights for his people. David's heart overflowed with gratitude, and he declared that all glory belonged to God. Word of David's victory spread quickly throughout the land. The people of Israel celebrated their new hero with joy and admiration. They saw in David the courage and faith that they themselves longed to have. Songs were sung, and David's name was praised from town to town. The victory gave them hope that God was still with them, fighting on their behalf. King Saul welcomed David into his court as a young champion. He saw great promise in the shepherd boy who had slain the giant and brought victory to Israel. Saul gave David a place among his warriors, and David's reputation as a man of faith and bravery began to grow. The king praised him for his courage, and many began to look up to David as a leader. But as David's fame increased, so did Saul's unease. The king's heart grew troubled and wary, for he sensed that David's rising popularity could one day threaten his own throne. Yet despite this, David remained humble, never boasting or seeking power for himself. His faith in God was his foundation, and he continued to trust in the Lord's plan for his life. David knew that this victory was only the beginning. He understood that more challenges and trials lay ahead, but he was not afraid. His confidence was rooted in the belief that God would be with him through every battle, every hardship, and every step of his journey. David's life was a testament to the truth that true strength comes not from physical might, but from trusting in God's power. The story of David and Goliath teaches us that God can use the unlikely and the humble to accomplish great things. It reminds us that no matter how daunting our challenges may seem, faith in God can give us courage beyond measure. Just as David faced his giant with confidence, we too are invited to face our own giants, whether fear, doubt, or hardship, with the assurance that God's power is greater than any obstacle. As the people of Israel celebrated, they were inspired to trust God more deeply. David's example encouraged them to believe that with God on their side, victory was possible against all odds. His story is a call to each of us to stand firm in faith, to be courageous in the face of fear, and to remember that God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. Reflect on your own life. What giants do you face today? What fears or challenges seem too great to overcome? Let David's story inspire you to face these giants with faith and confidence, trusting that God who delivered David will also deliver you. The battle may seem impossible, but with God, victory is always within reach. If you love the story, like the video and subscribe.